Hello, folks, and thank you for joining us at Perceive 2021. Welcome to the VC Investor Panel Discussion. I am your host, Garrett Welliver, VP of Worldwide Sales at Clarifai. I am joined by some tremendous individuals here today. First, Zavin Dar. I'll do a quick bio on Zavin. He's a partner at Lux Capital. Zavin invests at the intersection and union of cutting-edge biotech and software. He's led Lux's investments in Clarifai, Primer, Aranza, Braid, Visor Computable Labs, Crypto Numerics, Runway, Hugging Face, and many, many more. Previously, Zavin was an investor at Eric Schmidt's Innovation Endeavors, where he sourced and led the firm's investments in early stage technology companies, including Zymergen and Blockstream. Zavin drafted the firm's thesis in genetics, synthetic biology, and blockchain. Prior to venture capital, Zav was a founder and computer scientist at Discovery Engine, eventually acquired by Twitter. He engineered machine learning and AI systems across a proprietary distributed computing framework to build web scale ranking algorithms. Zavin was also a co-founder of Fountain Hop, one of the first hyper-local social networks. He holds a BS in symbolic systems and an MS in computer science from Stanford, where he was a researcher in Stanford's AI lab. He's currently a lecturer at Stanford and has taught quarter-long seminars in cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, philosophy, and venture capital. Welcome, Zavin. Thanks for joining us. We're really looking forward to getting your insights here today.
Thanks for having me, Garrett. It's good to be here.
We also have, we're also joined by Andrew Schoen, so a partner at NEA and the most recent investor in Clarifai. Andrew is a partner focused on enterprise technology investments. He's a board director or observer for Berkshire Grey, CCP Games, Dandelion, Duolingo, Expanse, Tamer, ThreatQ, and many more. In addition, he works closely with New Wave Foods, Onshape, Pentaho, PlayVS, Pocket, Rocket Chat, and Timescale. Andrew is also a member of NEA's Asia investing team and is involved with NEA's investments in ByteDance, XSky, and Zoibang. Prior to joining NEA, Andrew was a member of Blackstone's M&A team in New York. And he also previously co-founded the digital media company Flickstart, which went on to eventually be acquired. Andrew was named to the Forbes 2018 30 Under 30 list in venture capital. He earned his Master's of Management Science and Global Affairs at as a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University in Beijing. He completed his bachelor's with Phi Beta Kappa honors in economics and science of earth systems and engineering at Cornell University. Welcome, Andrew. Super excited to have you as part of the discussion.
Thanks, Garrett. Great to be here.
Believe it or not, those are abridged bios. I just read. So yeah, needless to say, you know, we're accompanied here by some incredibly accomplished professionals, and I can't wait to jump right in and allow these folks to drop some knowledge on all of us. So we'll start out, Zav. I guess first question to you. As we think at a macro level, how do you see the existing AI market across industries? So kind of what trends are you seeing, and how are you thinking about AI in its totality today?
You know, it's definitely gone from something that maybe 5 or 6 years ago was a little bit of a speculative buzzword to something that's now tangible, real, and here. I think across industry, you're seeing a bottoms-up realization as to the applicability and potential of it in various use cases and circumstances, and then also a top-down push from management boards, executives to have what I would maybe colloquially dub as an AI strategy. From the venture perspective at this point, Garrett, I almost don't see a distinction between AI companies and non-AI companies. I think any interesting company worth its weight in salt has some machine learning or data science or artificial intelligence component. So AI starts to feel more and more maybe like what software was in the early aughts, where companies were asking themselves, what's our software strategy? How do we kind of think about it? Or what's our internet strategy? How do we think about it? And now today it's a core component of any organization globally. I think that's the same kind of continuum and growth curve that we're going to see for AI.
Interesting. Yeah. Andrew, what are your thoughts? How is AI playing out today? Are there any specific trends that you tend to see?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with Zavin on this. Like any company in the tech space needs to have an AI strategy the same way, any company across any industry needed a software strategy or an internet strategy, right, in the early aughts. And so I think Andrew Ng has a good metaphor on this. Like AI is the new electricity. Like it's pivotal to running any company, at any scale. And so I really agree with his view on this. The other thing that is happening right now that's a little bit interesting is there's a bit of a phase change happening in AI where you have a shift from just kind of data scientists and AI experts that were really able to operationalize, deploy, build, and use AI models fully towards just broader developer community being able to leverage some of this stuff and to do so responsibly, right? I mean, one of the things that often gets overlooked is some of the nuance that it takes to really understand, how to deploy these models responsibly, how to make sure that they continue to work well and they don't, drift and change and create bias over time. And a lot of those problems were for a long time sort of, strictly within the realm of really knowledgeable data scientists and AI experts to sort of manage and mitigate those challenges. And now, thanks to platforms like Clarifai is a great example. We have some others in the NEA portfolio like DataRobot and Databricks, who are part of this same ecosystem and can be great partners to Clarifai. A lot of these challenges are starting to be a lot more easily solved and kind of responsibly managed by a more democratized base of users. So that's one of the interesting things that's happening right now, and it really ties in to what Zavin's saying about how every company needs to be an AI company, and now that's becoming a lot more possible.
Yeah, that's great. Democratization of AI, another topic that I want to touch on here in a second for sure. We talked a little bit about the current state, how AI is quickly becoming, if not already is, a necessity for businesses moving forward. Now, similarly, how are you viewing the future of AI, right? Everybody talks about AI being the future and whatnot. We talked where AI stands today. Where's it going? Zav, we'll go with you first.
I think Andrew, your point was really spot on, that as it becomes an increasing kind of necessary functional muscle for organizations large and small globally, there's a maturation phase shift that needs to happen, which is enabling companies to actually incorporate ML models. And so something where, again, 4 or 5 or maybe 6 years ago, you would have point specific solutions built by really, really, really incredibly talented engineers and machine learning kind of PhDs. Now we're starting to slowly build the layers of infrastructure that enable anybody and everybody to very quickly spin up their own AI or ML models and instances. I can point to probably 50, 60, 75 companies over the last 2 decades that have spun out of Google, where Google had built point specific solutions custom built for the large big data quote unquote problems that they kind of faced in-house. And then those companies spun out and built infrastructure like solutions for the rest of the world. And I think we're starting to see that for ML and AI. I think the future for ML and AI is one where there's increasing user empathy, increasing kind of UI UX, increasing productization around every layer of the ML stack. And so that goes from ingesting data, making data interoperable, ETL, labeling data, training models, hosting models, and then monitoring model drift, as Andrew kind of correctly pointed out, and ultimately in ways where you could both be a business user and interface with the end results of these models, and then also a non-PhD engineer and very quickly spin up these instances. And so I think that's the future. I would say, and this is where we've been wrong in the past. And I think it's a learning for all of us. The future won't be, oh, here's a model that's epsilon better than the world class, right? I think there's an exponentially decreasing half-life of any single model's kind of superiority at any moment in time. And so it's really not about who has necessarily the best mathematical machinery, because you're always one smart PhD student away from, for example, Matt Zeller in 2013, from really kind of disrupting the entire field. And so you can't bake a company or a strategy or an infrastructure type decision on that. What you really need to do is, how do we make sure that we're well positioned to continually incorporate all of the mathematical or statistical advances from machine learning? And that comes from having really robust, clean, and modular infrastructure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just gonna, lend my agreement to what Zav is saying. Just in that sort of a modular and agile approach is going to be important, because this stuff is evolving so quickly. And the great thing about this space is a lot of it is being published. It's open source. It's widely available, and so the ability to take that stuff and incorporate it quickly and in a modular and useful fashion is like, I mean, that's critical, because you can't essentially put all your chips on one model as being the perennial, superior framework or structure or architecture. Like you have to, the only way that you can remain cutting edge is by being adaptable over time. The only thing that I would add is that I think the future of AI, we're going from, what to date has been a mostly sort of structured data framework around AI towards a more unstructured future. And that's one of the real cool things that AI is ultimately gonna unlock in a way that's scalable, right? I mean, to date, most of the value that we get from data, that's scalable is data that's in structured, kind of tabular, clean, format. And yeah, there's a bunch of tools that help kind of cleanse and curate that data, but ultimately we're mostly talking about structured data today. But like 90% of data, is unstructured. Just, when you think about where information and data actually sits, it's mostly unstructured. And so as you think about the future of AI, which I think was your original question, I think it's going to be more and more unstructured in terms of the origin of the data, and that's an area where I think Clarifai can be really helpful in terms of ingesting that data, labeling it, cleaning it up, making it operational. And that's something that you frankly, these are insights and data sets that you really couldn't leverage without AI, because there's no scalable way to pull that kind of, label that, all of the data points out of, mountains and mountains of unstructured data without AI, right? You could throw legions of people at it, but that's not economically scalable. And so this is sort of a, it's a step function change in terms of the data that's actually accessible to, business, kind of the, business end users and analytics, et cetera, but also developers. It's just unlocking data that historically was dark and you just never could fully explore.
And I think to Andrew's point, we're at this moment in time where even a layer below, where maybe a Clarifai sits, there's so much innovation happening in and around data lakes, databases, relational databases, column databases, unstructured databases, and that's all sitting there and accelerating the ability of an ML infrastructure provider, something like a Clarifai, to very quickly build and develop new products. And at the same time, you're seeing markets, I think, increasingly so evangelize themselves, educate themselves, and adopt their strategies in and around the capabilities of ML. So it really is a perfect storm where you have kind of the base enabling technology, the actual core technology, and then the markets that will ultimately leverage the technology, all accelerating towards the same endpoint at the same time. So, I suspect the conversation today will sound very different than the conversation 3 years from now. But 3 years from now, we will likely sit back and look at this conversation, I imagine, as quaint, given how quickly everything is accelerating.
Super exciting stuff. Yeah, as part of the future of AI, and this has been something that's brought up, democratization, right? Democratizing AI. My question to you folks is, one, what is democratization of AI? What does it mean? What does it truly mean? And two, are we there, right? And if not, what's missing? What do we need to get there? Andrew, let's start with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way I define the term, I think we, right now at this moment in time, and there are different levels to this, but the democratization that we're seeing right now is from the data scientist and AI expert towards the more full stack type developer. That's the first sort of level of abstraction. Obviously, you can democratize further than that, but that's really what's within our reach right now. So that's kind of how I define the term. And in terms of where we are today, what's missing, I mean, there are a bunch of companies that are making really nice headway towards unlocking the power of AI for the average developer, or at the very least kind of the data savvy, ML savvy developer, but not necessarily a PhD level expert in the field. There's still work to be done in that space. I mean, we've talked about some of the challenges of different data types, kind of bringing in unstructured data, getting it labeled, getting it clean. We've talked about operationalizing that, not to mention building the models and figuring out what are good candidates for use cases, which frankly that might actually be one of the things that's a little harder for the average developer to figure out, like where did just standard statistical models kind of get you 99% of the way there with a small fraction of the time, and where do you really see benefits from kind of leveraging ML and AI. Although I think the ML AI ecosystem is getting it's developing and progressing so rapidly that eventually those trade-offs might not even have to be analyzed because it'll be so easy to deploy. But then kind of getting to once you're in the deployment phase, kind of managing those models, model drift, things that we've bias, et cetera, and it's not just kind of watching and managing model drift with challenger models, but it's things like looking for, understanding bias, correcting it, synthetic data, like all this stuff is still, you still have to sort of be a little bit more data savvy. This isn't stuff that you're going to learn in a developer boot camp, but it's becoming more and more kind of standard fare in terms of feature sets in a bunch of these AI products and platforms. And so even if you haven't studied this in an academic setting, as you're using Clarifai and a bunch of these other platforms, I think a lot of that workflow is gonna become much more sort of standard and obvious, right? The same way all software today is ultimately judged on kind of consumer grade. Like the best B2B software, frankly, is consumer grade in that it's like a beautiful experience. It's easy to use for the end user, right? It used to be that enterprise grade is kind of considered your gold standard, but the truth is at the end of the day, it's all B to H, right? It's all a human on the other end of whatever your product is. And so I think as this ecosystem matures, a lot of these things that historically had been in the realm of only people who had studied the space will know to kind of look out for, become a more standard experience that's neatly integrated and kind of intelligently presented to the end user.
That's great. That's great.
I really liked your use of B2H. I'd never heard that before, but I think it's so appropriate. I kind of think about like even every technology, right? The democratization of any like driving, right? Driving in the 20s and 30s and 40s, you used to have to know how to fix a tire on the fly. You used to have to know how to drive stick, like in real time. You'd have to know how to operate a clutch, do all sorts of things that maybe in the 80s and 90s got totally removed, right? With just kind of, the maturation of the auto industry. And, I think no one really probably, or a few people, at least in the US in the 90s and early aughts drove stick and started driving automatic. And now with Teslas and self-driving cars, I think it's ultimately going to be like, that's the full end. That's the end point of the, democratization of quote unquote driving. And so when you think of even the internet or software or maybe operating systems, right? Like, operating systems in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were command line interfaces where you used to need to know exactly what you wanted to do. You need to have a very kind of well-defined syntax and language for how you wanted to interface with the computer. And today, anywhere from a 2-year-old and 3-year-old to my grandma who's 97 can open up an iPad and immediately know how to interface with it and know what she's doing. And so ultimately it all comes down, I think that the H is so important in that B2H, understanding and having empathy and building proper UI, UX paradigms for ultimately interfacing with humans on the other side. And I think that's happening with ML. But I think we often get seduced into thinking that the democratization of ML or AI will necessarily be a mathematical advancement or a technical kind of breakthrough. And the reality is, I think those have happened and those will continue to happen. But the democratization will come into the usability and the UI, UX, and the productization that really understands the H on the other side of that B to H. And I think those companies are really, like, it clarifies the leader in that space, and it's starting to happen more and more across the industry.
Yeah, that's so what I'm hearing is, the first wave of AI was really made possible by putting ML into the hands of data scientists. And the next wave, or the wave perhaps that we're currently in, is that it's really putting AI into the hands of the developer. And perhaps the next wave from there, as we look into the future, is putting AI into the hands, usable AI into the hands of the operator. Would you guys agree with that statement?
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. That's where this stuff gets really exciting. So, next question: what does some of the best artificial intelligence companies that you folks see on probably a daily basis, what do they have in common? What are the things that they're all touching on, or the things that they're doing, or the tasks that they're accomplishing? What do they have in common that you see? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, a couple things pop to mind right away, but I'm sure as we talk about it, some more things will come up. But one is just a really kind of loyal, community of users, right? People that really love the product, that resonate with it. Oftentimes they get exposure to the product, kind of organically, maybe via a freemium type model. They start using it, they start developing on it, and it's really once you start to scale with the product that it becomes a paid product. I think that sort of not only try before you buy, but actually use it before you spend model makes a lot of sense, because even though we're talking a lot about this transition to a more democratized kind of deployment phase in ML and AI, like these end users still are pretty savvy, and they're going to make really thoughtful technical decisions about what products they use. And so, like, if you look across the landscape at the best like ML companies, almost all of them kind of put their product out there first and let the product experience sort of speak for itself, and that's how they try to win, at least in terms of winning the hearts of their developers. And I think maybe that's what Zav was talking about at the beginning around some of that bottoms up deployment model, and that's only getting amplified again by what he was talking about with the top down, right? So there's this mandate, at kind of the board or C-level to develop an AI strategy, and then the people that are kind of on the front lines of this, that are the most technically savvy, that are engaging with the product, these are the folks that are out there actually figuring out the capabilities and feature sets and usability of all the options that they have. And so being able to actually get your hands on the product, deliver some value early on, so that the end user can make a well-informed decision. I think that's something that the best companies have in common right now. And so there's a couple pieces to that, right? It's usability, it's time to value, it's kind of the business model of making sure that people actually get a chance to try it and understand why it's useful. That's just the first kind of thing that pops into my head. I'm sure there are a bunch of others, but I'm curious, Zav, what you think.
Yeah, I think there's probably a distinction to be drawn between ML and AI platform companies versus vertically integrated ML and AI companies. In either case, the best companies need to have a really kind of crisp and well-articulated raison d'etre. Like, what is the value that they're creating, for whom, why, when, how, where, and how do they capture value on the back end as a company? I think about kind of the vertically integrated ML AI companies. I often ask founders who I meet, or management companies that I meet, tell me what you do on a vertical basis without mentioning ML or AI. Like, I don't care if you have hundreds of thousands of employees somewhere in India or Bangalore who are doing this by hand, but I need to understand, absent of the technology, what value you're creating and how you create a business around that. And it may well be that you're able to, after the fact, tell me, oh, and by the way, how we do that is with ML. But removing the how, don't think about that. Tell me why you're doing it and what it is that enables you to do. For the infrastructure companies, again, I think we've harped on it. It really is, I think, a strong, ultimately customer-facing empathy, right? You can't get lost in the noise and the technical and mathematical jargon of ML and AI, and you really need to have developer or kind of business analyst and data scientist empathy to understand their workflows and their patterns, and build products for what they're solving. That's actually, it tends to be really hard. And frankly, like the management teams that can speak the languages across statistics and ML and DevOps and user interfaces and product design and product development, those are few and far between. So, we see thousands of companies for every single investment we make, but those are some of the common traits that we see on both ends of the spectrum, whether it's ML and AI platforms or vertically integrated ML AI companies.
Yeah, I really agree with you on the sort of vertical specific versus platform distinction.
Yep.
I mean, this is another example of kind of how the market has been evolving, right? In the early days, probably because of some of that expertise required and because of some of the sort of nuances of vertical specific, industry specific data, a lot of the kind of early wins were and are vertical oriented companies. Like they focus on a very specific use case. And I think more and more now we're seeing some of the more horizontal platform type companies kind of have their heyday, and ultimately the prize there is bigger, but it's also maybe a little bit more challenging because you have to do a lot more.
Yep.
But Clarifai is absolutely, I think, well positioned from a timing and a market footprint standpoint to capture this opportunity around, a horizontal platform does a bunch of different things for unstructured data, right? Like this is sort of the nexus of the next couple of waves. And I think Clarifai has really positioned themselves, quite strategically, almost being early to these markets. But the time, I think being early to these markets, puts the company in a really good position today for where things are kind of headed in the very near term.
And Andrew, I would say you coming in from NEA leading the most recent round is really telling, having seen the same kind of chart be traversed on the structured data side, right? With DataRobot and Databricks, two of your portfolio companies on the structured data side. I think that's happening on the unstructured data side. And the intent, of course, with something like a Clarifai is to build exactly the equivalent analogous solution.
Totally agree. And the real big question, up to this point, and still to an extent, is around timing. I don't think there's any uncertainty that the value of unstructured data is going to get more and more unlocked over time. There's too much data there and too much insight, and technology is heading in the direction where that insight is actually now kind of capturable where it didn't used to be. So the question is much more around when is now the right time? Is it still kind of 3 years out, 3 to 5 years out? I think it's happening now. That's my take. And if you talk to, the leadership of big tech companies, if you talk to the leadership of, some of the AI companies that Zav just mentioned, like Databricks, DataRobot, some of the RPA companies like UiPath Automation, they all agree that that they're trying to build their unstructured data strategies now, because they also feel like that this wave is imminent, and it's coming fast.
Hey guys, I want to wrap up with one question, and this is more of a big picture general question, but I think the audience always likes to hear, what are some exciting technology spaces or innovative technologies that you're seeing out on the street? It's always fun to hear about new areas of investment or new areas of interest for esteemed investors like yourselves. So I'm curious, Zab, maybe if you can start and just talk about some innovative stuff that's out there that's super interesting.
It felt like a secret maybe 2 years ago. I think after the rapid introduction of vaccines, maybe it's no longer a secret, but I think biotech right now is one of the most interesting arenas and domains to be playing in. There's just such a fundamental convergence of really beautiful maturing technologies across molecular biology, whether it's the mRNA technologies, CRISPR-Cas9, through analytic and biochemistry, through automation, and ultimately through software and machine learning and data science to kind of deconvolute and to understand the readouts from kind of high throughput experimentation. That's all enabling, I think, a increasingly rapid and increasingly effective preclinical discovery and development process that 10 or 15 or 20 years ago would have been unheard of. I don't think markets have baked in just how powerful these step function technology and science maturations and discoveries have been. And I think if you're an investor and or an entrepreneur right now, the next 1 to 3 decades will be marked by computer vision, natural language processing, and biotech. And I think those are going to be the most kind of enduring, effective, and impactful technologies and sciences, at least over the next 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, the advancements that can be made by combining the 3 of those within healthcare.
And frankly, like there are companies that combine all 3, and it's really powerful stuff. It feels like the stuff of science fiction, and it's happening right now.
That's great stuff. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
It's funny when you asked the question, I actually kind of had the exact same initial reaction. I mean, healthcare is the biggest industry, just period, full stop, like globally. And it's also probably the one where there's the most amount of value to be unlocked from a bunch of the technologies that we've frankly been discussing this whole call: AI, ML, unstructured data, et cetera. So that was where my mind initially went. But to not kind of pile on, I think Zav did a great job already talking through that opportunity. Zooming out a little bit, I think so at NEA, me and my late NEA partner Harry Weller had this framework that we used to think about kind of how digital technology is evolving. We called it the 3 C's, which are consumption, connectivity, and compute. Right. And so consumption is how do you actually consume digital information. Connectivity is how are you connected with it, and then compute is obviously like how do you actually process it. And there are super interesting things happening in all 3, right? So let's just take consumption for example. I mean, pretty much up until recently, there was only one fundamental way of interfacing with like digital technology. It was sitting down at a tape reader or a mainframe or a terminal or a desktop and just directly interfacing with whatever the digital environment was. Now that's kind of bifurcating, right? Like you're getting, if you want to directly interface, you're getting much higher and higher fidelity experiences, whether that's like VR or super high quality graphics processing, high resolution, et cetera, et cetera. So like if you want to be sort of immersed, that's getting higher and higher fidelity. At the same time, you also have this like ambient computing that's starting to penetrate your environment, and in a way where it's almost just injected into your reality, right? Like you've got sensors that are connected to the internet all around you, whether it's kind of smart home or audio interfaces, things that are sort of much less and less intrusive, where you don't actually have to be, dedicating 100% of your kind of mental, capacity to interfacing with that environment. So this is the first time there's been this like bifurcation, right? Up until now, like the individual is just sitting down and interfacing with compute. Now, like either you're injected to into the digital reality at a much higher degree of fidelity with your senses, or it's injected into your reality in a way that's much more sort of passive and natural, and that's super, super interesting. And then in terms of we can connectivity, I think we all understand that one. But in terms of compute, like there's a bunch of interesting stuff going on in raw compute as well. And so I think we're entering a phase where the compute environment is becoming like more and more heterogeneous. It's becoming, more and more powerful in specific areas. So, whether that's things like quantum computing or neuromorphic or ASICs that are getting better and better. I think there's a bunch of cool stuff happening at the edge where you're basically able to do more and more, especially leveraging compressed, ML models. You're able to do a ton of really interesting compute now at the edge that just wasn't possible before. So I think we're also seeing this transition to a much more heterogeneous compute environment. but in a way that's still manageable, right? Because a lot of the infrastructure that's running the compute is getting more and more abstracted away, right? You know, the developer of the application, and definitely the user of the application, doesn't have to think about that as much, but they're able to leverage that power, which is really interesting. And so we've seen, you know, we had a quantum computing company go public, you know, last week, which was really exciting. INQ, we're thrilled about that. But we're also investors in, you know, cool stuff that you know is doing compute at the edge, that's doing, you know, neuromorphic compute. There's all kinds of really cool stuff happening in that space as well. So those are kind of some of the fundamental forces. But I agree with Saab that, like, industry-wise, probably the biggest opportunity right now for all these technologies to be applied to is healthcare.
Awesome. Absolutely terrific stuff. Andrew, Zav, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. You know, on a personal level, it's such an exciting time to be at Clarifai and to be with Clarifai. And more broadly, it's truly an incredible time in our technological history for AI and ML as a whole. And so I'm just super excited to see where it goes next. Andrew, Zav, thank you so much. Let's have a big round of applause from our virtual audience. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you for having us. Good seeing everybody.
Thanks for having us. Take care.